The snow falls in absolute silence. No torches, no church bells, no ships on the horizon. Just the weight of a white sky pressing down on a continent that Europeans will not name for another 2 centuries. Stand here long enough and you begin to understand the scale of what is already here. Not absence, not wilderness, not emptiness, but something that has been growing, breathing, trading, warring, and praying for longer than Rome existed. The land we will one day call Canada is not a blank page. It is a manuscript written in dozens of languages, encoded in birch bark and cedar and bone, alive with civilizations that most of the world will spend centuries pretending were never there. This is their story, and it begins long before anyone thought to record it. To understand 1300 AD, you must first understand the ground beneath it. The continent did not begin with European arrival, it began with ice. Roughly 15,000 years before this moment, the great glaciers that had buried the northern half of North America began their slow retreat, exposing a landscape of staggering abundance. The people who followed the ice's edge and the animals it left behind were not wanderers stumbling blindly through wilderness. They were skilled, adaptive, observant. They watched the land the way a scholar reads a text. Over millennia, they learned it completely. By the time 1300 AD arrives, this knowledge is ancient. The societies built upon it are not primitive experiments in civilization. They are civilization, complex, layered, and deeply rooted. The year 1300 finds the northern continent organized into worlds, not one world, but many, each one distinct in language, architecture, economy, and belief. What binds them is the land itself and the long, invisible threads of trade and kinship that stretch between them.
In the northeastern forests, where the maple grows dense and the winters come hard, the people of the Haudenosaunee, those who will eventually be called the Iroquois, are living within longhouses that stretch as long as a European Great Hall. These are not temporary shelters.
The enemy is near.
These are
I see
permanent,
guidance.
sophisticated
Your path is
structures
clear.
that house
Protect the people.
dozens of families under a single roof, organized by clan, governed by a social architecture of remarkable intricacy. Women hold the ownership of the longhouse. Women select the leaders. Men wage war and hunt and speak in council. But the lines of descent, the lines of power, run through the mothers. It is a world that will seem incomprehensible to the Europeans who eventually arrive, and that incomprehension will cost everyone
We
dearly.
are gathered to form the great law.
Haudenosaunee
Let the
are on the
wampum
edge
bind
of
our
a
nations in
transformation
peace.
in
The council agrees.
1300. The oral traditions speak of violence between nations: Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Seneca, a long cycle of raid and revenge that bleeds the forests. And yet, somewhere in this century, a man the traditions call the
And
peacemaker
so the great law
is
of
said
peace
to have
binds
walked
us.
from village to village,
It is written
carrying
in the
a
living
message
breath
of
of our
unity.
people.
The
The
great
fields are
law
failing.
of
We must
peace,
relocate.
one of the
We
most
stay. The
sophisticated
ancestors
political
protect this
documents
land.
in
Yes,
human
Kind Mother.
history, though it will never be written on paper, begins to take shape. A confederacy, a shared council, a system of governance built on consent and deliberation rather than conquest. It is a political revolution happening in the forest, invisible to anyone outside it. Move west, across the Canadian Shield and the Great Boreal Silence, and the land changes. The forest thins, the horizon opens. The rivers that run south into the Great Lakes carry trade goods. Copper from the northern shores of Lake Superior, hammered into ornaments and tools, moving through networks that stretch from Hudson Bay to the Gulf of Mexico. This copper is thousands of years old as a trade
Current
commodity.
strong.
The
Good.
people who
Southward.
move it understand
Watch the bend.
something about economy and distance
These
that
shells
would
are
not
fine. How
seem
many for this
foreign
copper
to
piece?
a merchant
3
in
strands. It is from
medieval
afar, but
Venice.
copper is strong. Agreed. A
Value,
good trade.
scarcity, relationship, reputation. These are the currencies of the interior. Further west, the plains begin. In 1300, the buffalo herds that will later stagger European imaginations are already vast beyond calculation. The peoples of the grasslands have organized their entire existence around this abundance. The hunt is not random, it is engineered. At places like Head Smashed Inn, Cliffskin, what is now southern Alberta, generations of hunters have been driving buffalo off the edge in a coordinated operation requiring scouts, runners, and animal psychology honed over centuries. The bones
Here.
at the base of that cliff go down 6
Water
meters.
trucks.
That is not
This is our
accident.
map.
That is
The
mastery.
line holds. It moves as we planned.
The
Good.
plains
The herd will
peoples
follow the
of
new growth.
1300
Next season,
have
they
no
graze here.
horses.
See the windbreak? It
Those will
shelters
not
us from the
arrive
north
for
wind.
another
Yes,
3
it is calmer
centuries,
here.
carried
And the ice
north
gives us
from
water
Spanish
under the sun's
colonial
light.
herds. But the absence of horses has not made them stationary. They are mobile in ways that exploit the terrain completely, moving through established seasonal patterns, following the
Hurry,
herds,
the wind
managing
rises.
the land
Sleds
through
first,
controlled
dogs
burning
last.
that shapes where animals graze and where people follow. To an outside eye, they might appear to roam randomly. In reality, they are executing a map drawn from generations of accumulated knowledge. On the Pacific coast, the world is different again. Lush, wet, extraordinarily rich. The peoples of what is now British Columbia live in a world of such biological abundance that they have had the surplus and the time to develop some of the most complex artistic and ceremonial cultures on Earth. The cedar is the spine of their civilization. From it, they carve ocean-going canoes capable of hunting whales in open water. From it, they build plank houses that shelter hundreds. From it, they raise the towering carved poles that encode genealogy and myth and cosmology in a visual language that takes years to learn to read. The potlatch, the ceremonial feast in which wealth is given away rather than hoarded, is already ancient.
To the
by
Wolf Clan of the Northern
1300.
guests, this blanket
It
for
is
your
a
enduring
system
alliance.
that
And to
confounds
Eagle.
every European economic intuition.
This copper holds the wealth of our
Prestige
people. It is
earned
the heart
not
of
by
our potlatch.
accumulation,
Its presence
but
alone
by
speaks of our
distribution.
generosity.
The chief who gives the most commands the most respect. It is not irrational. It is a brilliantly evolved mechanism for redistributing resources in a society without written law, binding communities together through obligation and reciprocity. It works. For thousands of years, it works. At the northern edge of the continent, in the Arctic, history is in violent motion. For thousands of years, the ancient Dorset people had lived at the top of the world, a culture adapted to a landscape so extreme it seems uninhabitable. They had no dogs. They dragged their own sleds.
From the Pacific
They
coast,
hunted
the land
winged
gives way to
seal,
the Arctic
breathing
tundra,
holes
to the sea
with
ice and the
patience that bordered
extremes.
on meditation. And then,
The sky
sometime
spirits
around
dance
1000 AD, something arrived from the west. The Thule people, ancestors of today's Inuit, moved east from Alaska with extraordinary speed, carrying dog sleds, large skin boats, and a sophisticated toolkit developed for open water hunting of bowhead whales. They were not merely more efficient than the Dorset, they operated on a different technological register entirely. By 1300, the Thule expansion is near complete. The Dorset people are vanishing, absorbed, displaced, or simply outcompeted for resources as the climate shifts and the sea ice patterns change. The Thule have won the Arctic, and now they begin to build the culture that will endure to the present. It is the Thule who have recently encountered the Norse settlements on Greenland and in the place the sagas call Vinland. The contact is fractious. The Norse call them skraelings, a word that drips with contempt.
But it is the Thule whose descendants will still be there when the Norse colonies fail and disappear. The memory of the pale strangers with their metal blades persists in Inuit oral tradition
Good
for
metal,
centuries.
not enough.
Proof
We
of
offer these
contact
furs.
that the
We need
Western
more.
world will
The
spend
pale
a long
strangers
time
came in wooden ships with
refusing
metal
to
blades.
believe.
They built strange
By
houses, but could not
1300,
read the ice.
the medieval warm
harbor is
period that
closing,
had
ships
swelled
come
Europe's
less often,
harvests
colonies
and
failing.
burst its cities past their walls is ending.
The cold
The
shifts the
climate
herds.
is
This
shifting,
won't hold.
cooling,
Trails were empty. We
tightening.
searched far.
In
We
the
share what
northern
we have.
latitudes,
The sun's
the
low
effects
angle
are
warms
felt
this side.
earliest and
See the
hardest.
shelter, the racks, they're fresh.
Growing seasons
Game
shorten.
nearby. We adapt,
the
we
game
survive.
patterns shift. The Norse colony in Greenland, already strained, begins its long, slow
This
collapse.
winter is harder.
For the peoples of the subarctic
longhouses
interior,
will see
the
us
cooling means harder winters and
These
more
gifts
desperate
sustain us
hunts.
through hardship.
But civilizations
with
do not
gratitude.
simply end because the weather changes. They adapt, migrate, consolidate, transform. The societies
path
of
of peace is long,
1300
but our
have
roots are deep.
survived ice ages. They have outlasted every empire that Europe will eventually claim as foundational. Their roots go down further than any European cathedral. What
great
will
law
happen
guides us
to
to
these
consensus.
worlds in the
We
coming
are agreed.
centuries
The
is
decision
not a
stands.
mystery. The ships will come. The diseases will come. Smallpox, measles, influenza, tearing through populations that have no immunity, killing 9 in 10 in some nations before a single European soldier fires a single shot. The land will be mapped, named, divided, claimed. The longhouses will burn. The potlatches
The fire is
will be
bright.
outlawed.
The law is alive.
The knowledge
belt at our center
encoded
binds
in
us.
100
Let the morning light guide us.
languages will be treated as superstition. But that is not this moment. In 1300, the continent breathes freely. The Haudenosaunee councils debate in the longhouses. The copper moves through the forest trade routes.
The stew is
The
almost
whale
ready.
hunters of the
Smells good, Mother.
Pacific
Can I
push
have
out
more?
into
In a
open
moment, little one.
water. The Thule build their sod houses against the Arctic wind. Tens of millions of people live full, complex, meaningful lives on a continent
We bind
that
our
is,
nations
by
with
any
these words.
definition,
The great Latives of the
already
Council Fire witness our
civilized.
unity.
History has a
Find
habit
furs from the
of
cold lands
beginning
for your
its
shells. You have
stories
dried
at
meat
the
and grain.
moment
Show your
of
way. Our
arrival.
salt pottery are ready. Let
The
us trade.
ship on the horizon, the sailor who steps ashore, the flag planted in foreign soil. But arrival is never a beginning. It is an interruption. And
hunt
what
was
it
good.
interrupted
We have
here
enough for the winter.
was
Yes,
already
full day.
ancient.
Now, we rest.
The continent does not need to be discovered. It knows exactly where it is.